Over the course of my life, I've encountered many people who've experienced a hardship of some kind, pain, struggle, and it's led them to question things about God and maybe even question their faith. And you might know someone who fits that same category, or maybe you're in those shoes as well. But there are people that I know who have buried a child at infancy. And I have vivid memories of the father carrying that tiny coffin down the aisle. There are people I know who are much smarter than me, intellectual, so much that they struggle to get this God. Like, come on, really? Understand this God? And there are people that I know of who've experienced physical and emotional abuse at the hands of their spouse, and have wrestled with that. Lord, where are you? I know a young girl who at one time, she graduated high school, went off to a school of ministry where maybe it didn't line up with her upbringing to a T, but there was very little room for her to ask questions or be curious about this faith that she is immersing herself in. And at one point in her timeline there, a mentor of hers who invested in her as she was growing up in the faith passed away. And there was hardly any space for her to grieve. When you are journeying with someone who's processing deep questions of the faith, maybe even the existence of God, and their context is church hurt or shattered dreams, if they feel stuck at all, there's hardly anything that helps. Cliche, maybe well-meaning, but that doesn't really help. In fact, sometimes that hurt. Scripture, definitely well-meaning, but does not always help when we're stuck at that wall of pain, doubt, and wonder. And I've learned the importance over the years of my ministry, and this is practical experience and sometimes school of hard knocks, but learn to give space, permission even, to feel all the feelings, to ask the hard questions, to express anger to God, even to doubt. Think about all of the things we say regularly in the Apostles' Creed. This Jesus, a historical figure, was born of a virgin, raised from the dead. He's ascended and he's coming back. I mean, come on. And so if we're not creating safe space for people to ask questions here, now, especially our young people, our children, our students, if they're not processing difficulty now, and we're not just spoon-feeding them, these are the answers, this is the way to think, when they get off to the next section, the next chapter of their life, college or whatever it is, the next step, they're going to be confronted with challenge and stressor and hardship and all the things. And we're challenged all the time to exchange our belief system, our biblical worldview, for something we can see, taste, touch, feel, something we can fully comprehend, something that maybe even we can control. Setting ourselves up for failure. This morning, we're beginning a 4-week series called After Doubt. It's inspired by a book of that same title, written by pastor, professor, author A.J. Swoboda. The subtitle of that book is How to Question Your Faith Without Losing It. I'm excited about this series because next week, Robert Hand is preaching, the professor. Next, after that, is Brandy Stevens. And then Jarrett Davis, who's been up here with us this morning, is going to bring it home. You know this series is going to get better as we go. Here's the deal. I want you to know that it is okay to ask questions and doubt your faith. It's okay. Oswald Chambers wrote, Doubt is not always a sign that man is wrong. It may be a sign that he is thinking. Throughout his book, A.J. Swoboda uses words doubt and deconstruction interchangeably. So the first thing I want to do this morning is define, what do we mean by deconstruction? Deconstruction is the dismantling of anything that's been constructed, and it's not always bad. In architecture, a building is demolished to make way for something new. In baking, a cookie is crumbled to make a pie crust. When we were growing up playing with Legos, we would tear down the invention to build something new, bigger, better. Theological deconstruction is the process of one's dismantling of accepted beliefs. And it doesn't look the same for us all. Does not always lead to the same result, but here's the good news. Deconstruction, when done well, leads to reconstruction. And that's what we're after. Deconstruction leads to reconstruction, which is what it means to learn and then assimilate this faith of our fathers, forefathers, into our own and make it our own. If you're walking through doubt or deconstruction, I want you to know it's okay. And if you're not, be forewarned, it's coming for you. There will be some struggle that will make you think really hard. And the scripture that we read this morning reminds us that that struggle is very real. So the first thing I want us to know, and it's the only thing I want us to know, it's okay to doubt. 1 Timothy is a letter that was written from the Apostle Paul to the pastor Timothy. Paul was once a zealous persecutor of Christians. He had a radical conversion experience as he was on the road to Damascus to persecute more Christians. Jesus appeared to him and saved him to the uttermost. In fact, Jesus said of Paul, "This is my chosen instrument to take the gospel to the Gentiles." And that's exactly what Paul did. We have Paul to be thankful for, that the gospel has reached our hearts. Paul went on several missionary journeys, planted many churches along the way, and he wrote many letters that are in the New Testament. One of those is the book of Ephesians, a letter to the church of Ephesus, where Timothy was pastor. Timothy, a young man, it says he's Paul's beloved and faithful child in the Lord. Timothy's mother was a Jewish Christian, his grandmother just the same. Timothy's father was neither one, not Jewish, not Christian, a Gentile non-believer, and Timothy accepted Christ under Paul's ministry. He was discipled by him almost as if they were doing life on life or life to life. And Timothy accompanied Paul on his second and third missionary journeys. Set apart was Timothy with the laying on of hands to pastor and to shepherd. In 1 Timothy, the Apostle Paul is writing Pastor Timothy to encourage Timothy because ministry is hard. Even for the layperson, living out the gospel is hard. And Paul's purpose for us all is the same as it was to Timothy, to encourage Timothy to love really well. Our job as believers, pastors, to pastor one another well, is to love really well, which is needed in an environment where questions and doubt abound, people struggling with their faith. There were some leaders in the church, Hymenaeus and Alexander, referenced in 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 20, and they were teaching that the day of the Lord had already come, which has all kind of end time implications and could mean either that Christ had already returned, to which Timothy and the people in that church, and we might feel the same, Christ has returned. What? And this is the world we're living in? The other thing it could have meant is that when the Spirit came at Pentecost, that was the point in saying Christ is going to return. He'd come. So God's finished with this grand story that he's writing, the narrative of salvation history, leaving no hope for personal and physical return of Christ. Neither one of these allowed that kind of hope. Neither are in line with historic Christian teaching, which undoubtedly was still being worked out in the first century church. And both of these extremes would have overwhelmed people with fear and concern. Not only were Hymenaeus and Alexander stirring up false teaching, which was spreading like gangrene. That's what false teaching does, and it needs to be cut off. But not only were they stirring up false teaching, some commentaries believe that Alexander the metal worker mentioned in 2 Timothy 4:14 is the same as this Timothy, that this Alexander that Paul's writing Timothy about. That Alexander did Paul a great deal of harm, working with metal. Hymenaeus and Alexander, they were mean people, handed over to Satan, which is a very strong way of inferring they were excommunicated from the church, hopefully in order to work out their salvation. But it makes you wonder, what happened to them that got them to this point where they're stirring things up? Very simply put, according to 1 Timothy 1:19, they did not hold on to a good faith and a good conscience. Instead, they rejected those things. And one commentary said that religion, our faith, and good conscience, morality, these things hold hands. By religion, we're talking personal faith in Jesus, which drives behavior. It drives obedience. Right understanding leads to proper response every time. Somewhere along the way, Hymenaeus and Alexander got things mixed up. Rejecting these things is like the Israelites rejecting Moses just after they left Egypt, through the Red Sea, set free of their slavery and their oppression. Moses went up onto the mountain to be with God and to find out what's next. And while he's up there, the Israelites are just begging Aaron to build a golden calf for them, something they can see, touch, taste, feel, and relate to their cultural familiarity, something that maybe they can even control. All of these things are similar to how Hymenaeus and Alexander are stirring up the faith, trying to control the narrative, maybe even control God, trying to eliminate all need for faith. This is so familiar. God is so hard to get. Certain persons like them have made shipwreck of their faith. That is a familiar experience for the Apostle Paul, who knew 4 shipwrecks in his life, knew a thing about storm and struggle, and never once walked away from the faith, never once doubted that the Lord would deliver him. His experience was such that his heart was set on fire. He never once even lost his life. John Wesley is the founder of this Methodist movement that we are a part of, and he knew a thing or two about a storm. When he was on his way over to America in 1735 from London, coming as a missionary, he experienced a horrific storm out at sea, and he was fearful that this ship's going down and we're all going to drown. And while he's on that boat, there are German Moravians who are just singing and praising God the whole time. And this was quite confusing to John Wesley, who asked them, "Aren't you scared?" And they asked him, "Are you saved?" "Yes, I'm saved." They asked him again, "Are you sure you're saved?" "Yes." They asked a third time, "Are you sure you're sure?" And now John Wesley's like, well, I think so. And that got his missionary career off on the wrong foot. He failed miserably in America, went back to London, a span of 3 years' time that he is clouded by doubt and uncertainty, struggling with his faith, wrestling with God. And one night he's at a church meeting on Aldersgate Street there in London where someone's reading from Martin Luther's preface to the Epistle of Romans. And in that moment, it's like the light clicked for John Wesley. He wrote in his journal, "My heart was strangely warmed." He had an assurance that he was saved. Just goes to show you how boring reading or preaching can make an impact on someone. God can use anything. That set the trajectory for John Wesley's life and for the people called Methodist. This movement that had its roots, its origins with doubt, this movement that really had its beginning with a heart set on fire. Yes. Is it in you? Church, it's okay to doubt, to struggle and wrestle with our faith and fight and express anger towards God. You want to know the best thing about giving ourselves to that? The best thing about doubt and deconstruction? It's bringing humility back into our theological process, and even better, back into the church. Humility needs to be brought back in to my heart, to the church. It's very much like the process sifting where that chaff is separated from the wheat. And here's what happens in that process. Our doubts lead us to question the walls and barriers and the cookie cutter that we've been building all these years, things that subdue us or exclude us and others. It invites us to consider the words that we use that have lost their meaning, or the things that we've done that have caused more harm than good. And it forces us to think about how we convey the truth we say we believe. Because what you believe is not what you say you believe. It's what you do. And when we struggle and doubt, man, it's just ripping out all of that chaff and getting us back to the foundation of our faith. Death and deconstruction challenge us to look for that foundation, even though it mocks and belittles the ability to have one. A.J. Swoboda wrote, "To struggle with one's faith is the surest sign we actually have one. To wrestle with God and struggle with our faith is the surest sign to know that we have a faith." My first year of ministry, 25 years ago, Leanne and I walked with a young family through a journey of cancer. This man was 39 years old. He'd played football in the NFL, was probably the smartest one who ever did, because he also at this time owned his own engineering company. He was married, had 2 beautiful children, and we were in the hospital after 8 months the night he died. 8 months, death, diagnosis to death. We spent the night in his home so that we could be with his wife as she told her 3rd grader and her 1st grader, "Daddy's died." What do you do with that? And how do you answer their questions and minister to their hurt? I know there are people in the room who can relate to that, who've had similar experiences or other experiences, people who are struggling with the loss of a child, even a stillborn child. I know there are families in the room who are staring an insidious disease in the face. I know there are people in the room who long for companionship and intimacy and relationship, and it's evaded them for the better part of adulthood. I know there are people who struggle with faith questioning and wrestling with God. People who are learning to cope with mental illness, people who are staring death in the face. themselves. And we experience that. And it's okay to say, why? Or to wonder, where are you? We go through these things ourselves and we might be like, really? Lord, is this it? Is this all there is? I want to remind you who we are as a church and as a people. And for some, this may be hard, but it's important to know if you're journeying with someone, the challenge is to make room for doubt. Make room for questions. Be curious about the faith. You don't have to have, I don't have all the answers. It's okay to say nothing sometimes. It's okay to sit in that process as questions are being fired upon us and just be the faithful presence of love. That's exactly what Paul was reminding Timothy. This is who you are through the laying on of hands. Faithful love. There are no cliches. The struggle is real. And so in the moment of someone else's pain, let's make space for question asking. We don't have to be trite. Let's just sit with them in their pain. And the reality is, some of the things we have been peddling as a people of God, these things need to be dismantled so they can be reconstructed according to truth. That's who you are. Let's give room and opportunity for people to question. And now, if you're someone who is struggling and questioning, my encouragement is lean into the church with your questions, with your doubt, with your church hurt. Find someone who is safe, that you can be real with, that you can be fully known, and hopefully fully loved by that faithful presence of love. The goal for us all, as we struggle and wrestle and endure hardship, is to give as much of our frustration and anger and hurt as we can to as much of Christ that we understand in that moment. And by God's grace, we will rebuild this foundation that the church is built upon. And it stands the test of time. Lord, have mercy.